The first game I played this month was Iconoclasts, on the recommendation of my subscriber Brand Shasky. This is a Metroidvania-style action platformer with some very significant puzzle elements. You're using a variety of tools to both fight enemies and explore an environment. And I mean, like, each tool individually has both purposes. Like, your wrench can spin, which both allows you to turn gears and also can be used against enemies as a special attack, which leads to really fun progression because you're both looking at each enemy wondering what attacks they're vulnerable to and going into each environment looking for cues to tell you what tool will get you through them. I found the gameplay shined most in puzzle solving. I have a lot of appreciation for how much work it must take to really nail making your puzzles consistently harder enough that they remain engaging but not so hard that your player just gives up. And Iconoclasts has that down. Toward the end of the game, there are levels with puzzles spanning dozens of rooms. If we pretend for a second that the Hitman games don't exist, I would say that one of these is my favorite level I've played all year so far. If I were to pick a weakness with this gameplay, I would say it's mostly in its optional content. As far as combat goes, I had enough fun just learning every enemy's and every boss's timings and figuring out how to take advantage of them. And most of the stuff you can track down elsewhere are materials to craft slight augmentations to your combat ability. I didn't feel a need to be able to craft my own unique combat style, and the early augmentations I found were so insignificant I stopped caring about them down the road. Luckily, the puzzles to get to the chests full of these resources are fun in and of themselves, and there is a little bit of much deeper side content, but the whole thing feels a little underdeveloped. However, subpar side content is something that gets into games made by hundreds of people, and Iconoclasts was made by just one guy. Joachim Sandberg did pretty much everything for the game. Writing, programming, composing, designing. I read an interview he did with Game Informer that I found really interesting, particularly how he talks about the game's story as sort of a personal indulgence, something existing primarily for him. I read this as being kind of self-deprecating because that's often how I talk about my videos. And if this is the case, I hope he's gotten to feel good about it, because it's a strong point of the game and why it was recommended to me in the first place. There are some rough edges to the storytelling, but it really nails the things that matter. You play a teenage mechanic that's trying to be kind and help the people around her, while also living under an oppressive theocracy that's slowly destroying everything. When I say the story has rough edges, I mean that the dialogue is sometimes exposition heavy or feels unnatural. This didn't affect the experience too much for me though, because every character has motivations that feel really well defined, and the expressiveness of their individual animations helps things a lot. So you get the emotional impact of the story even if the prose that appear on screen aren't the most pleasant to read. And I found the amount of exposition actually kind of put me in sync with the main character, who doesn't care as much about the minute details of the world at large as the concrete ways that she can help the people right in front of her. The story's strength is then contrasting her to like every other character in the game, who are all trying to adhere to some greater religious ideology or some idea of who they should be. Sandberg talks about this in the same interview, mostly in terms of these characters not following their passions, but I also saw it come through in the way that many characters are so dedicated to whatever they feel like they should do that they just can't see the actual people that are affected by their actions. I found the escalating and increasingly dark events in Iconoclast to be an effective parable for how important it is to really dissect and interrogate those voices deep in our head telling us the most dangerous six-letter word in the English language, and how it's entirely possible to be a good person without anyone telling you to. I really enjoyed Iconoclasts. Thanks for recommending it, Bran. I also finally played through the 2016 Doom after getting it on sale about 3 years ago. I bounced off it back then before it really clicked for me, but I played it for long enough this time to realize all the things this game was doing to set itself apart from many of the boring first-person shooters that came out in the decade or so before its release. The combined successes of Call of Duty and Gears of War turned much of the shooter genre into complex games of whack-a-mole for a while, and Doom subverted that by having enemies that chase you down or throw projectiles that do splash damage. And the only way then to avoid either reliably is to constantly be moving and throwing back damage of your own, or to charge right at them and reap the ammo and health benefits that rewards. This has all been praised before and probably in better words, but I want to talk this game up for the sake of people like me who never got around to or didn't think they'd like this game, but would probably really enjoy it. It was really refreshing to me to play a shooter where I was zipping around and getting up in enemies' faces rather than peeping up to take pot shots from cover. Games often give players both a look and move input, and you know, it's really fun to be able to use them both at the same time. Doom is also one of several games I've played over the past year that have started to change the way I see difficulty in video games. When I was a teenager, I just saw it as a bragging rights thing. And weighing this against how frustrating hard games can be sometimes made me mostly choose easier difficulty settings. But playing Pathologic 2 and the Souls games at the beginning of the pandemic made me start to see difficulty as more like having tutorials turned on for how to best enjoy a game. I had heard video essayists and critics say this for a while, but I didn't feel it instinctually until getting mobbed trying to take on too many enemies in Old Yarnum, or getting caught in an infinite starvation death loop. The most fun parts of these games are respectively intimately learning the way that every enemy functions within their environment in the Souls series, or feeling the urgency of limited time and resources in Pathologic 2. And the game's difficulty constantly punishing you for not doing these things paradoxically makes the games easier to fall in love with. I don't have a recording of the first time I tried to play Doom in 2012, but I'd imagine I chose the normal difficulty and never really reached a point where I couldn't get away with just hanging back and taking well-aimed shots. But when I tried it this year and chose the highest available difficulty, I was very quickly severely punished for that. Well, not actually the highest difficulty, because when I played the game, I assumed those red difficulties at the bottom weren't available till you beat it once. So just the hardest of the ones above that. And subsequently got to the point of recognizing the really fun way to play this game, zipping around on rivers of demon's blood. Also, since I complained about this a little bit with Iconoclasts, I want to offer up Doom as an example of a game that I think does optional unlocks really well. Everything you find feels useful, but I want to specifically focus on the weapon upgrade system. There are only 8 guns in the game, and you get most of them pretty early on. So as fun as they are, it does create a little desire for more variety. This is satisfied by weapon attachments, which most weapons have 2 options for. You can get these by exploring the environment and finding these little floating robots. This is already encouraging exploration by giving the player something the developers know they'll want, but these attachments can also be upgraded. And this is the closest thing the game has to an XP system. These circles fill up as you go through a level and kill more demons. And each completed circle rewards 1 upgrade point. And if you want to fill up all the circles, you're going to have to explore most of a level to find as many demons as possible. And then the process of upgrading feels like a discovery in and of itself. The attachments start out as like a special attack with a cooldown time usually, but as you upgrade them, they slowly morph into just a weapon of their own. The 2 I used the most were an attachment on the shotgun that launches a grenade that at its highest upgraded level does massive splash damage with a direct hit, and an attachment for the assault rifle that at the beginning just lets you shoot a half dozen homing rockets, but at full power fires them endlessly until you run out of ammo. By the end of the game, I didn't use primary fire on either of these guns, and they handled completely differently with their own strategic considerations. Overall, it's a really nice feedback loop where discoveries motivate you to make more discoveries. Okay, you get it. Doom is great. I'm gonna move on to a game I liked even more now. 2017's Prey. I got interested in going back to play this game when I saw the beginning of Joseph Anderson's video on it.
Please be informed that a far more fitting name for Prey would be BioShock 3. Or System Shock 3. Not only do I think that Prey is worthy of being in the same group as these games, I also think it's better than all of them by a significant margin.
I was very skeptical of this, thinking back to the response I remembered from Prey's release, and being the mega fan of BioShock that I am. But having played it now, I don't think he's entirely wrong. Prey is a masterclass in using gameplay mechanics to bring a world to life and make you interested in the people inside of it. And though I need to replay the original BioShock and Infinite to say for sure, I don't think I'd have a hard time making the argument that this is better than both of them. They have interesting worlds with great art direction and tell incredibly affecting stories, but the gameplay doesn't always play to those strengths, and often feels like a chore the player has to complete before seeing the best parts of the game. Prey, rather than being a first-person shooter with exploration elements, is first and foremost an exploration game. And if I were to look for a comparison in the enjoyment it brought me, before BioShock I'd actually bring up Gone Home and Return to the Obra Dinn. That satisfaction of poring over the environment around you to learn everything you can. You're a researcher aboard a space station ravaged by aliens. You're learning about what the station was, what darker experiments were being done there, what can be done about the aliens, and what happened to its over 200-person, mostly deceased crew. I know this is superficial, but I like that every character you come across has a name, and since they all wore tracking bracelets, there are computers where you can look each of them up and set a waypoint for them. It's a nice way to find all the interesting stuff in the game that doesn't require you to use a wiki or walkthrough, and also makes in-universe sense. place. And there's so much effort like that put into making the Talos 1 space station feel like a real place. Each of these crew members have specific jobs, and everything you'd think would be necessary to keep the place running is somewhere you will visit at some point. Additionally, there are like 5 different technologies that are really interesting within the lore of the game that also have vital gameplay importance. They function like the bracelets. We're being told that everyone on the station is tracked and there are terminals where you can access that data, is simultaneously information about what it's like to live there and how to play the game. They're more interesting than that. I know tracking bracelets exist in real life, and I'm sure there's probably companies somewhere that use them for their employees. I just don't want to spoil them because I was happy discovering them within the game. But I love how knowing the lore in this game actually makes you better at exploration and at combat. Yes, this game does have fighting, but kind of in the way Minecraft has fighting once the sun goes down. Yes, there was an accomplishment in that game to be able to survive against enemies, but combat was mostly a thing you did to be able to safely explore and scavenge an area, rather than like The Last of Us or BioShock, where it's much more the opposite, searching around for resources to be able to use in a fight. In a similar vein to Minecraft, Prey is about creating little bubbles of safety to explore in, killing enemies so you can look around at the lab they're in, read all the notes on the whiteboard, look at the scientists' emails, mess around with the experiment they had going, and rifle through their drawers to get materials to clear the next area. It all brings the station to life as a dangerous place, made tragic by how it contrasts with the much safer environment that audio logs and emails imply. All that's to say, it would be a worse game if it didn't have fighting in it, even though I don't think that definitionally makes it a first-person shooter. Like really, I'd advise playing this on the hardest difficulty and turning on all its extra survival settings. It brings out the best in this game of making you feel like a terrified human being fascinated by the environment around them. So I obviously love this game. I think it's my favorite that I played this year so far. I really want more people to check it out and have the experience I had with it. I think Prey deserves a lot more compliments in what it's done in pushing the medium forward. Sure, it's got its problems. Like, I think the main quest tries to convey a sense of urgency that's a bit undermined by how fun it is in this game to really take your time looking at every nook and cranny. But its best elements are so far ahead of most games I play that I more just reflected on flaws with it rather than become actively annoyed by them. I'd really recommend Prey. It's free now on Xbox Game Pass. That's a plug for Prey if you already have Xbox Game Pass, not a plug for Xbox Game Pass. You can just buy the game separately, it's not that expensive. Okay, I think that's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching. I'd love to hear what y'all think of these games, if you played them in the past or because of this video, and I'd also love to hear what y'all are playing in April and onward to stay sane. And if you enjoy listening to me reflect on video games, I'd love to have you as a subscriber, because I'm gonna keep doing that. Cheers, y'all. Thanks for being awesome.